Hi, folks, and welcome to First Bite, Fed, Fun, and Functional, a speech therapy podcast sponsored by SpeechTherapyPD.com. I am your host on this nerd venture, Michelle Dawson, MS, CCC-SLP, CLC, the All Things Peds SLP. I am a colleague in the trenches of home health early intervention right there with you. I run my own private practice, Heartwood Speech Therapy, in Coletown, South Carolina, and I guest lecture nationwide on best practices for early intervention for the medically complex and fragile child. First Bite's mission is short and sweet, to bring light, hope, knowledge, and joy to the pediatric clinician, parent, or advocate.
By way of a nerdy conversation, so there's plenty of laughter too.
In this podcast, we cover everything from AAC to breastfeeding,
ethics on how to run a private practice,
pediatric dysphagia to clinical supervision,
and all other topics in the world of pediatric speech pathology. Our goal is to bring evidence-based practice straight to you by interviewing subject matter experts.
To break down the communication barriers so that we can access the knowledge of their fields.
Or, as a close friend says, to build the bridge.
By bringing other professionals and experts in our field together, we hope to spark advocacy, joy, and passion for continuing to grow and advance care for our little ones.
Every fourth episode, I join in. I'm Erin Forward, MSP, CCC-SLP, the Yankee by way of Rochester, New York transplant who actually inspired this journey. I bring a different perspective, that of a newish clinician with experience in early intervention, pediatric acute care, and nonprofit pediatric outpatient settings.
So sit back, relax, and watch out for all our squirrels and enjoy this geeky gig brought to you by SpeechTherapyPD.com. Hey, this is Michelle Dawson, and I need to update my disclosure statements. So my non-financial disclosures. I actively volunteer with Feeding Matters, National Foundation of Swallowing Disorders, NFOSD, Dysphagia Outreach Project, DOP. I am a former treasurer with the Council of State Association Presidents, CSAP, a past president of the South Carolina Speech, Language, and Hearing Association, SCISHA, a current Board of Trustees member with the Communication Disorders Foundation of Virginia, and I am a current member of ASHA SIG 13, SCISHA, the Speech Language Hearing Association of Virginia, SHAV, a member of the National Black Speech Language Hearing Association in Basel, and Dysphagia Research Society, DRS. My financial disclosures include receiving compensation for First Bite podcast from SpeechTherapyPD.com, as well as from additional webinars. And I receive royalties from the sale of my book, Chasing the Swallow: Truth, Science, and Hope for Pediatric Feeding and Swallowing Disorders, as well as compensation for the CEUs associated with it from SpeechTherapyPD.com. So those are my current disclosure statements. Thanks, guys.
Hi, this is Erin Forward, and these are my disclosure statements. I receive a salary from Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center. I receive royalties from Speech Therapy PD for my work with First Bite Podcast and other presentations. I also receive payment for sales from the First Bite Boutique, which I have with Michelle Dawson. For non-financial disclosures, I am a member of ASHA and a member of Special Interest Group 13. I also am a volunteer for Feeding Matters. I am a contributor for the book Chasing the Swallow with Michelle Dawson, which I receive no financial gain. I also am a member of the South Carolina Coalition Committee with ICDL-DIF full-time. The views and opinions expressed in today's podcast do not reflect the organizations associated with the speakers and are their views and opinions solely.
All right, everybody. Back. Not about y'all, but Erin and I kind of took a hiatus in all things SLPdom because, well, life was very eventful, which I feel like is my running track line, but it has been. So I kind of feel like this is that perfect way to come back from a lovely hiatus by sharing joy with another fellow SLP of faith, passion, and joy. And so I am excited to come back with a pop and a bang with none other than Miss Madi Metcalf. And she hosts Making Sense of Maya, which is a lovely podcast on speech therapy PD. And bless her heart, she does therapy in Arkansas, which the one thing I remember about Arkansas is going to a CSAP conference at Bill Clinton Presidential Library. And my sweet friend, Miss New Jersey, she was the president of New Jersey at the time. We may or may not have tied one on. And she snuck out a Bill Clinton wine glass in her purse. Because my purse was too full. I couldn't take. Obviously, we were going to steal the wine glass, but I couldn't steal it because my purse was too little. So she long-term borrowed it and delivered it to me the next day. So this is my one experience in Little Rock in all of Arkansas. But hi.
Hello. What a great memory of Arkansas you have, and a little memory item from our contribution to the country.
And it's kitchen counter when Goose was doing the dishes, and he goes, "Mom, you fancy wine glass your friend stole from?" And I was like, "Oh my God." And he goes, "Well, it died." I was like, "Oh my karma, baby." Yeah. He really likes to hand wash dishes, but sometimes the dishes do not enjoy the experience as much as he does.
Slippery and soapy, accidents happen.
We're fine. It's fine. Overwhelmed. Okay. And tell us about in Arkansas and how you got into the world of PFD, because you and I met like in person in real life November of last year, which is crazy because I feel like I've known you longer than that because of like our circles of overlap and joy with speech therapy PD. But yes, so how did all of this come to be?
Yeah, so I am a newer SLP. I graduated with my master's in 2020 from the University of Arkansas. So started off in COVID. Always had an interest in feeding. I started off in my first place and was an independent contractor working in the schools. I said, hey, I didn't get a lot of experience with PFD in school, but I'm so interested in pediatric feeding and swallowing. They said, great. We have one kid at this one school that has swallowing difficulties. You can see them. And I said, great. So I drive in 2 hours to this little school, had to go there.
Gosh.
It was quite the commute. I get there, start seeing kiddos, navigating COVID. It's a trip. And then I realize, like, whenever I get ready to start seeing the kid with the feeding disorder, they say, oh, wait, actually, we're seeing this kid through the school, and in schools you don't treat feeding and swallowing because it's not academically relevant. And I was like,
Bumpkiss, but okay.
What? Okay, it's like me, brand new CF, didn't have the best relationship with my CF supervisor, didn't have a lot of like support or mentorship. So I was just like, well, I'm figuring out so many other things. I didn't have time to dive into that. So just was not a great fit for that job. So I ended up transitioning to a clinic in the middle of my CF, started my CF over. It's okay if you have to do that. You're not a failure.
Say that again. That is, y'all, if it's not the right fit, you can find the right fit. Yes. Amen.
Yeah. And, it was like a hard decision switching in the middle of my CF, but it felt like the thing to do. And so I went to a clinic that I supervised at during grad school. I said, hey, I am super interested in pediatric feeding and swallowing. They said, we would love to have you. Our person that was doing feeding and swallowing just left. So I walked in and I had a whole caseload of feeding and swallowing. And my CF mentor was fabulous, but she had Beckman training, a little bit of dysphagia knowledge, but I was kind of like on my own. So we were either sinking or swimming, and we floundered a little bit, but we kept our head above water. And so that was kind of my introduction. Had a caseload because I had an interest, and there's just not a lot of people sometimes that want to do feeding and swallowing. And so then I kind of just dove into as many CEs as I could. So I started off with tactile sensory motor approach to feeding, which was super great for learning just the motor functionings that we need to happen while we're eating. We need to have the tongue to lateralize food to the molar so that we can chew. And this is what a rotary chewing is. I didn't even get that in grad school. We minimally talked about it, but I had no idea.
Yeah.
And then from there, I kind of fell into, I had a coworker that was going through a tongue tie release with her daughter. So that led me down the tongue tie myofunctional train, kind of hung out there for a minute. I did Making Sense of Myo. But what I kind of kept coming back to was I love helping these kiddos. I love supporting the families and helping the families feel confident and competent in feeding their babies or their school-age kiddos or, however old they are. And so I just kind of found myself kind of slowly leaving like the myo, keeping what I've learned about like craniofacial development and like the importance of having a good understanding of the anatomy and physiology
Mhm.
of what goes on in like our craniofacial structure, and allowing that to kind of help guide what I need to know for feeding skill. But then there's just so much more outside of feeding skill that you have to look at sometimes, even if it feels
Yeah.
a little uncomfy and like you're stepping out of your out of your scope. We can still advocate and refer and, I don't know, be a team player in that sense. So yeah, kind of a long-winded approach of how a brief little snapshot of how I got to where I am.
But we all have that story. Like they gave me all those kids. Michelle, there's those kids. And I started in the public schools as an SLPA before it was an SLPA. It was an SLT, speech language teacher. And then like my actual first certificate was a speech teacher, which is not a thing anymore, thank God. But then got my master's, went to work in a hospital, acute inpatient adults. Can you imagine me with adults? Like I was like a freaking hummingbird zipping around all of these old people, and bless. We had some of the loveliest patients. I really do love the older people, but it's not for me.
Mm-hmm.
And we went to South Carolina and I got into early intervention because I couldn't find a hospital job. And that's how I found where I was supposed to be.
Oh,
And
wow.
so EI and peds and then teaching it. But it's funny that you say about you didn't even learn about the rotary chew, because I had one night of peds dysphagia in my entire dysphagia class, and that was it. And even now we have graduate programs that predominantly they have a dysphagia class, but it's geared towards adult dysphagia, predominantly taught by adult dysphagia researchers that don't have the peds experience. And if you look at the course description does not include the new updated PFD terminology, which I understand academically. If you want to simply change the course description or a course title, it has to get voted on in-house within a department. Then it has to go before a faculty senate to get approved. And then it has to wait for the entire new course catalog in conjunction with a new cohort. So it can't even be the current cohort. I didn't know any of that before I got into academia. So it can take a year to 2 years of forward planning in order to make the shift, because otherwise it impacts the current cohort. So if you're changing course description, course credit, course title, it takes, but that means we have to be that much more progressive in
Yeah.
embedding this in. Okay, so then shameless joyful plug to come to ASHA this year. What's the SIG? SIG 12 maybe for supervision, or SIG 10 for higher issues. Oh, I should know this. But we're doing a 2-part invited talk with them on why pediatric feeding disorder and peds dysphagia should be taught, as well as the clinic and the clinical experiences. But we're doing an analysis globally of what it looks like in different countries, but a deep dive into what it looks like here in the States as a call for action as to why we need this in university clinics.
Oh man, that is awesome.
Right?
And so needed. I mean,
Yes.
it kind of blew my mind. So being like a new SLP and kind of, not feeling confident in what I was doing because I just didn't have the knowledge base yet.
Yeah.
And trying to seek out mentors was so tricky because there just like wasn't enough people. But if we changed the education and the exposure that people got in school, how would that change what people go into in the field? Like since I started supervising graduate clinicians last year. And like it is the absolute best. It is so fulfilling. But I had 2 students come in and they're like, I don't care about feeding. I'm scared of feeding. I want to do language. And I'm like, I hear you. Just, come into it with an open mind. And both of those like clinicians, they left and they're like, I love feeding. I had no idea. This is amazing. And I'm like, I know. And so I call it the feeding bug now. I know all my students say, I bet you're going to catch the feeding bug. So just buckle up. But, you don't know what you don't know. And so if you don't get the exposure, it is scary. There is like choking risks and so much management and that sort of thing. But there's also so much joy in it.
Yeah.
Yes, but it does. We need to create solid mentorships. We need to create solid clinical practicums where they're doing the best practice. You were right, extrapolating best practice from different areas and understanding the evolution and change in knowledge. Like when I was taught about evolution of mastication, it was everything had to be in place by 4. So I am a reformed Chewy Tube Z Vibes girl. Haven't used them in years, but I did. I was the queen of all things. I'm gonna wake a face up, But that's because I was taught that that final chew had to be in place by 4. Now we know from Melandraki's lab, the I Eat lab out of Purdue, that like that rotary chew pattern doesn't happen for kids until they're typically developing in 12, which is a huge difference. But if we didn't seek to understand and pull in new information, that there'd be no way we would know.
Right.
So it's crazy.
Yes. Okay. All right. We somehow got sidetracked right out the gate. But yes. Okay. So talk to me more in depth about your training, like what classes you took, where your experiences were, and what, I mean, we know where I stand with all of the things, but I mean, I took classes that were pro Chewy Tubes once upon a time, but then I took classes that taught me a different science base.
Yes. So I definitely started off, I don't know, I definitely look back at some of my early therapy that I did and I'm like, oh no, we didn't even do anything with food. And that shit is fine because when we know better, we do better. My life motto. So I started off, well, actually the very first thing that I got my hands on that was my Bible starting off was Suzanne Morris and Marcia Duns-Klein, A Comprehensive Guide to Mealtime Development.
Yeah.
That book got me through so much. I remember my first infant eval that I had on me, I like took that book home the week before, and every night I was like in my living room reading a different chapter to figure out what I was going to be doing with this little infant. And so that book is just so great on kind of outlining what development is, except like the developmental pre-feeding checklist even that I use for assessments a lot of the time, like it has like a rotary chew at 2 years. And so just kind of keeping your mind open with new research that comes available to us and that sort of thing. But so that was kind of my first really big help in understanding pediatric feeding and swallowing. I took the Talk sensory motor course because it was kind of everywhere. We had the textbook at my clinic. And so, like I said, that was a really good introduction for me just to understand like the sensory and the motor system do work together. There is a certain level of like feeding skill that we need to like advance through diet textures and things like that. And I learned like some nifty little therapeutic things like side placement and things like that to kind of help with feeding skill as well. And then so much of the other things that I got was like honestly speech therapy PD, your podcast, First Bite, listen to that all of the time. And I don't know, I definitely was so beneficial getting such, you are very vocal about using things that are not vibrating and silicone in the mouth. And so that was so interesting because it was such like a differing viewpoint from what I had been learning just coming out of like my Talk Tools course and things like that. And so taking in information from not just sitting in your camp of, oh, well, I am a Talk Tools girl, or I am only going to listen to things from Marcia Duns-Klein at the Give Permission Institute, but kind of taking in information from as many different sources as you can to kind of, one, fill your tool bag with a variety of different things that you can pull because every child in front of you is going to be so different. But also I feel like that's kind of led me to be able to make my own, well, like take it from the courses, take it from the experts, but then as I'm continuing to read research articles, I can be like, oh, well, this is how they came to this, but this is different now, and kind of forming my own opinions based on research.
Yes. Okay, Bear and I were walking this morning. We walk Gypsy Hill Park. It's adorable. They have a duck swan pond in the middle of the park. And so we,
Goose, Bear, and Mommy walk 2 miles every morning together before school or summer camp. But he made some comment this morning, and I was like, about how he didn't want to break apart the microwave. Okay, folks, out of context, that sounds insane. Maddie and I were talking before we started recording. Summer camp this week is Break It Apart week, where they break apart whatever. Last year they had cabinets and a fan and an old computer. I know we donated a couple of old computers and a keyboard. So anyways, Bear was like, Mom, I already learned about a microwave. I don't need to learn about a microwave anymore. I don't need the science behind this. And I was like, Bubby, I was like, if you're the smartest person in the room, get out and get a new room. And he looked at me and I said it so quickly. And Goose was like, yup. And I was like, okay, try it. What you said. But like they actually got the gist of what I was saying, was to be teachable, to be a lifelong learner.
Mhm.
But that's just it. If we can be humble to learn from different viewpoints, that's where our patients thrive, is through our humility and being able to extrapolate and being comfortable to learn from the interprofessional practice partners in different disciplines. There's still SLPs that don't think OTs have any seat at the table for feeding. And I just can't comprehend, because what you just said, sensory and motor grow together.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I recently listened to Kelly Mahler. She gave a talk on, if you don't know who Kelly Mahler, highly recommend looking into her.
Who is she?
She's an occupational therapist, but she's very big in like interoception and ARFID. About like how to honor our bodies, like internal cues, like that everybody's, for me, when I feel hunger, my tummy rumbles, it feels empty. I get a little like lightheaded and a little hangry sometimes, but that's how I experience hunger. And I can't put that into my patient's mouth whenever I'm talking to them about their hunger cues, because maybe their body's experiencing hunger in a different way because their like interoceptive system processes things differently. But she is so interesting, and I learned so much from that course.
I just found her. All right, y'all, on Instagram, it's Kelly, KELLY_MAHLER. Kelly Mahler. Thank you. This is amazing.
She is fabulous. But just kind of touching on that, I don't know, when you're working in feeding, there's so many other systems that are involved that we have to kind of be willing to listen to and, partake in. Because I would have never learned about the importance of interoception, and that my kiddos that have eating difficulties might also be struggling with interoception, and even being able to identify what hungry feels like for them. So that was, I don't know. Yeah, just always learning, even if it's not from my discipline. Like, I didn't get any ASHA CEs for taking that course, but the knowledge that I gained from it made such an impact in my clinical practice. And so, not thinking it has to be only ASHA CE approved courses, or it has to be a course from an SLP, but being willing to think back to those 4 domains of PFD and realizing it's okay to learn from a GI or an OT or a psychologist, because they have so much to bring to the table too. Because you can't just hone in on your one area when you're working with PFD. It's so interconnected, and we have to have at least a base knowledge of the other people that are sitting at the table too.
Yes, Bowel Sounds by the North American GI Association. That's one of my favorite podcasts. And I have learned so much from that podcast, just going for a walk. Like you said, interception, and my stomach literally started rumbling as soon as you started talking about hunger cues, because it's me. There's no CEUs attached with it. It's not a formal thing. It's just a bit of awesomeness that, I love that.
It was really great. And I think she did it with a registered dietitian who was, or a neurodiverse registered dietitian. So it was this really beautiful course where they talked about the nutritional aspects and the interoceptive aspects, and like how we can help kids with specifically ARFID kind of navigate that. But so much of it was also just understanding. That's been another big thing in my practice recently that I've been kind of shifting towards, is that, we make accommodations and modifications for so many other kiddos on our caseload. If we have a spoken language difficulty, we get them an AAC device. We give them sign language. If we have a kiddo that can't stand the tags in their clothing, we cut the tags out for them, or we allow them to only wear cotton clothing. And so, I've had this big shift from listening to neurodivergent adults kind of share their experiences, we have to have that same mindset with PFD too. Sometimes they also need accommodations, and maybe that's eating their same food. And we have to
Yes.
be okay with that. The newest episode of, or the newest season of my podcast is Making Sense of Selective Eating.
Mhm.
And I pre-recorded yesterday with Laura Hellfield. She's a neurodivergent adult who has always had selective eating tendencies, but she's also in the healthcare field in the UK. And so she has like a really interesting perspective. But one of the things that we really hit on yesterday was you can eat differently and still be nourished and safe for your body.
Yes.
And that can be a spectrum. And so, I don't know, that's been something new that I've been kind of implementing into my practice, but it's led to some uncomfy conversations with parents.
Yes. But here's my question, and the whole food pyramid that you're supposed to eat what's on this food pyramid is a myth. This is not based, oh my Lord. People pay money to have their products, lobbyists pay money to have the products placed on the food pyramid where it's supposed to be. You don't have to eat what's on the food pyramid in order to be healthy. And there's so much inherent bias and blatant racism in some of the foods that are selected on there, like all of the dairy products, that like this is, you can be a vegetarian or a pescatarian and still get plenty of meat or plenty of protein and iron. And it's possible, but this is, I cannot wait to listen to that one, ma'am.
It was super fabulous. I highly recommend it. We had a great chat yesterday. But yeah, I don't know. That's even some of the mentors like I've sought out in my area and stuff, like I am 100% guilty of making goals for, we'll add 3 new fruits to their diet. We'll add 3 new proteins to their diet. We'll add 3 new vegetables to their diet. And then that's what we work on in therapy. And it's really hard to make progress. And I think a lot of it comes from the kid isn't like intrinsically motivated, which is another one of the Get Permission Institute's like primary and responsive feeding too. Just one of those like tenets. Like we need that intrinsic motivation. They're not intrinsically motivated to eat those things. And so the goal food is my goal food or mom's goal food, but not the child's. And so I don't know. It's been really eye-opening. And it's a little uncomfortable too, because that's, what a lot of what I've learned and have been mentored with is, diet expansion. We need a healthy diet, combating through my own beliefs and perceptions on what diet culture has ingrained in me and all of that. There's so much unpacking to do in the feeding world. But whenever I am working with foods and therapy, I found that one of the best things that I can do if the kiddo is old enough and able to have the conversation is like, what are you interested in trying? What's something that you would be interested in adding to your diet? Has there been a food that you've seen your mom or your brother eating that you're curious about? And one of my friends said peanut butter. She's had so much exposure to peanut butter, but it's something that she doesn't feel comfortable eating. And so we've started exploring with peanut butter. And every time we go, we try it in a new way. So like last week, we made Oreo sandwiches with peanut butter in the middle.
Delicious.
So good. So good. But, that's not
I'm really hungry.
In this part, we're talking about all the foods. But, we've had such productive therapy sessions, and it's been centered around what she's been interested in exploring, not predetermined by me or her mom, who would choose that it was 50 new fruits and vegetables. But we're starting in her comfort zone. And then we're like slowly edging her out by providing with a new mixture, like an Oreo sandwich.
I always struggle when the parents want X, Y, and Z, but they themselves don't consume X, Y, and Z or model it. And it's, why are we asking the child to do something that you yourself are not interested in eating? Or, okay, so I want a raised vegetable bed at the new clinic. One for vegetables and one for herbs. To be honest, it's too late in the season for vegetables, but it's still a good time for an herb bed. But as a culture, we don't grow our own like we used to. So food shows up. So, and little ones are not involved in the kitchen. They're not involved in the culinary experience. It just shows up and it's done. But also, I love gardening. That's one of my girlfriends brought me a new sticker. Renee. And it says cultivate joy. And it's a little like
I love Joy, but she popped by on Friday or Thursday and brought that over. But that's getting them in the garden. I would love to see a research project on the act of gardening and experiencing it from the beginning to end. And if those experiences changed and modified their intrinsic motivators to want to try it, because now they've had extrinsic, they're from a proprioception perspective, they have felt the dirt, they've smelt the clay, they've picked the herbs, they've muddled the herbs. And does that shift their comfort so that internally all of a sudden they say, I want to try it because of this experience? I don't know how to do a research study on that, but like that to me would be very exciting.
That would be really neat. And then just like taking it like that step further and like that bigger sensory system, like being outside is such a sensory, like diverse sensory experience. It's like how much more just like regulated and grounded would that child be from like having repeated exposure, going out to the garden, working out there, the repeated exposure with knowing they were growing it and all that. Would be super interesting to see researched.
Also, I would love to know what their vitamin D's level do before and after just to get the sun.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, honestly, like a lot of our nutrition comes from the environment that we don't get. I mean, how often do we truly get 2 to 3 hours of sunlight a day?
Yeah. Not very rare.
I try to hit an hour. Person, and I'm like, I say as a heat bubble is over the continental United States.
Oh, that's another thing too. A lot of my kiddos that, especially like the more school-aged kiddos, a lot of them also have like anxiety disorders that they've already had diagnosed, or they just seem a little bit more on the anxious side. But going back to that vitamin D, like how much of it is like they're feeling dysregulated, anxious, a little overwhelmed. And the one thing that they are actually able to control in their life is what goes in their body.
Yes.
So, oh man, that would be such a great study for so many different reasons.
Yeah. So you touched on something about the caregivers, about like the caregiver and like them wanting to select the food and what they put in the child's body. And there's some stuff coming out of Northeastern is the one in Boston, right? That's the school up in Boston.
I think so.
I think it's Northeastern, about caregivers, body dysmorphia, and caregiver eating disorder and how it's manifesting in children with a pediatric feeding disorder and where that lumps in under the psychosocial component of PFD. And is that which it makes me worry, and I don't have the research, so I'm just putting this out in the universe, especially our females, and to some extent our males that spend that much time on social media in early childhood, and they're being flashed images of this is the perfect body, this is the diet culture, but they're getting diet culture immersed at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Where is that showing up? How is that showing up? And I mean, I don't know. It's just something that they're starting to talk about out of Northeastern. But when you talked about the anxiety, I've seen it personally in a handful of cases, but enough that it nudges you in the back of your mind.
Yeah. With the caregivers as well, I can't help but wonder. I had a couple of parents that it seems like they might not be telling their child, oh, you're going to get fat. Like they might not be speaking those things to their child, but I can't help but wonder if like subconsciously, if that's the motivator for them being like, well, they have to eat fruits and vegetables. They're eating too much junk foods in quotation. Because like they have their own internal struggles with body dysmorphia, or, their past experiences with like diet culture. And so like that worry that they're just kind of projecting onto their child for not wanting to end up being overweight or whatever that might be. I wondered if that plays a role sometimes because, it's not the child that goes to the doctor saying, hey, I have a problem. I'm only eating Ritz crackers and goldfish. That's coming from their parents voicing that concern.
Yes.
And I think it's so important to honor a parent's like worry and concern and listen to them and, navigate that. But I definitely think it's been to it's been like to the detriment of the child sometimes, that seems that there's such a push for diversity that might not be attainable for that child in this moment. Who knows where they'll be in 10 years, but like what we're currently working towards is, wow, those are some really big goals. And being able to talk to the parent about that without, but then, so much with one of the things that really shocked me about working with PFD is it's not just the child that's your patient. Like, you are working with the whole family. And as a new clinician, that was terrifying. I don't have kids yet I was sitting here telling this caregiver how to nourish their child. And that was a really uncomfy spot to sit in for a long time. It's something that I'm more confident in, but every dynamic is a little different and it can be a little nerve-wracking. But that's been one of the hardest things that I've had to kind of work on having those conversations with parents, is finding ways to honor their child with where they are now and accept what they're currently eating, and kind of resetting their goals to a more realistic place sometime.
Did you ever do any of the early intervention caregiver coaching training, like the birth to 3 or 0 to 3 series, or the FGRB?
I have done a little bit of caregiver coaching with Janine Brenner.
What's this?
She's done a lot on speech therapy PD. She does a lot with like language and like autistic kiddos, and just kind of, but she takes a very like parent coaching based approach to everything. And so I've learned so much from her on like how to fit things into the family dynamic and meet them where they're at, engage in the child's interests, and just kind of, supporting the parent, not doing the therapy that you're doing with like a magic wand behind a closed door, but inviting the parents in and like encouraging the parents to make this part of their daily routine. So once again, like that crossover, just because I'm interested in feeding doesn't mean I'm not taking courses in other areas, because I've learned so much from listening to clinicians with experience in early language, because they have so much goodness to share on, one, meeting the child's interests, like where they're at, and two, parent coaching. But definitely need more in that area.
It's caregiver coaching is so hard, and I was pulling her up on the website. Even as a parent, I mean, yes, I've been a parent for 11 amazing years, but I know how to parent Goose and Bear. And sometimes I think I'm like, are we doing okay at this? I wonder. But Bear busted out a CeeLo Green classical music song, which is not appropriate. And I'm like, guys, are we doing great parenting, or is this bad parenting? And Goose is turned into this really cool 11-year-old. No, this is just true parenting. And I was like, okay, make sure you brush your teeth tonight. But that being said, we know how to parent our own, but giving parenting advice when you don't really know what it looks like. And when you're in a clinic, you can be removed from the natural setting because the clinic is still a faux spot.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I love doing home health. I am 41 years old. I don't want to drive all over God's green earth 5 days a week. I will completely admit that I am just too old for that. But that's because I would rather see my tiny humans and then go home to my tiny humans who are not so tiny anymore. And I can feel college around the corner, if that makes sense, right? But the ability to have access to telehealth and to do teletherapy for feeding and swallowing but not all states have it, and I know that. But that's lovely because it gives me the opportunity to do in-clinic a couple times a month, and then to also, on those other sessions, we're in your home, and then guide me through what your home looks like. And yeah, it's not me there, but it's a virtual component to it that helps me grow my insight into the caregiver-child dyad and where fill in the gaps so that I can help coach. But caregiver coaching, there's the 0 to 3 is, I just got the book. I haven't read it yet, but that's a really good resource that one of my girlfriends recommended to me, Dr. Cherie Harbick. But I go back to the Family Guided Routines-based intervention from
Juliana Woods that now Dr. Francis Burns has inherited and is taking over. But that's just such a spectacular tool.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I've recently switched I went from a clinic that was doing a lot of myofunctional therapy and feeding to a clinic that was doing, well, it's still a private practice, but it's all home-based. And I'm seeing across the lifespan
Love that.
which is really good. So I am still like a newer clinician, and I do know that I want to specialize in pediatric feeding and swallowing. But one of the things that I'm doing to kind of work towards that is I'm currently a year and a half into working towards my board certification in swallowing. And
Yes.
so super excited about that. It's a doozy of a certification, but I'm going to be somewhere in 3 to 5 years. So might as well be somewhere in 3 to 5 years with my BCSS. So I'm working towards that. And, in order to pass the test, you need competency across the lifespan. And so thought getting some adult dysphagia experience would be really beneficial. And then I'm also hoping to get a little bit of, I know that adult and pediatric dysphagia is different, but there's just so little for what we can do with pediatric dysphagia. So I'm hoping to kind of learn a little bit from what I'm doing with adults and see if any of it could be like transferable over to peds. And so that was one of my motivators. And I'm also getting fee certified, which is super exciting.
Oh, that's awesome.
So pumped. I'm excited to kind of get a better understanding of the anatomy and physiology of swallowing with my fees training. Anyways, I went down a rabbit hole. So I'm also working with my pediatric patients, and it's been so eye-opening seeing these kiddos in their home versus the clinic. It's like I have one kiddo on my caseload, and his mom would tell me, like, he's kind of all over the place. We have to use screens to get through a meal. He runs all over the house during his snack. But then you come to the clinic and he is this like quiet, reserved, barely gets out of his seat kind of kiddo. And I was like, oh, interesting. Okay. But I had no idea. I just didn't know what they were going through. I get into the home. This kid cannot sit still for more than like a minute. And he is 2.5. And he is just running one end of the house to the other, back and forth, crashing into things, throwing things. Mom is like chasing him around. I was like, is this what your day looks like? Is this kind of like your norm? This is all day from the moment he wakes up until the moment he goes to bed.
Yes.
Except when we go to bed, I have to put him in the car and drive him around the block so that he'll go to sleep because that's the only way he'll sleep. And so it just gave me so much more insight to what they're actually living through. And the first 3 sessions that I was in their house, we hadn't really talked about OT, but we talked about OT and we're getting him set up with an OT evaluation.
Yes.
I was like, this little kiddo is not regulated in his body.
No, he's not.
And so, she had been to other places, like she's talked to her PCP about this and stuff, and everybody said, oh, he's your normal 2-year-old. Every 2-year-old gets into things like that. But they saw the same 2-year-old that I saw in the clinic that sat there and was quiet and really reserved because she was like, I don't know, shy, a little overwhelmed, stranger danger, not in his natural environment. But then I saw what this mom was going through, and I was like, yeah, Mom, your intuition was right. Like, this is not a typical 2-year-old moving around.
Yes.
But then, like, I also had this other friend that would do so amazing at the clinic. He called it Miss Maddie's house. So he would always come to Miss Maddie's house, and we would be like the coolest little food explorer at Miss Maddie's house. We were always super excited to eat. He knew where the snacks were. We would go pick out his snack. I would pick out my snack, and we had a great time. Well, I start going to his house, which he's so excited that Miss Maddie's at his house, but we don't eat at his house. He doesn't want anything to do with food at his house. And this is matching what Mom and Dad were telling me that they were seeing at home.
Uh-huh.
We could do nothing about that at the clinic because we were doing awesome at the clinic. And so it's been so interesting to see these differences from the clinic to the home. And I'm really curious to see what kind of progress we can, if the generalization happens a little bit more working in the home versus, but yeah, super interesting stuff.
I immediately start wondering what trauma has occurred around meal times for the second one. And then the first one, I wonder about the size and the space. That was something that Irene Ingram mentored me for 18 months. I think I had her as a mentor. Wow. And when I worked at her, she's a sensory OT guru, but she's a baby whisperer. I don't know how to describe it. She's a baby whisperer. But she would always tell me, the space is too big, Michelle, you need to think smaller. And
And when a kid has the free reign of their house and they're running, this space is too big. So how do you create a smaller, safer space? So as soon as I see a kid dysregulated and running around, I'm like, all right, we need to ground them in a smaller, safer bubble. Like, where's your bubble? Let's find your bubble and let's sit in our bubble and be, grounded here. So she always had us do, I don't know, it looks like you're running a kid through a tube sock. It's like one of those spandex lycra things. I can't remember what it's called, but she would have it anchored down on either sides of the clinic floor. And we would literally just crawl through. It smelled not good. They washed it regularly, but I'll admit it smelled not good. But the act of going through and having to crawl, you're integrating certain reflexes. I don't know what they're called. I'm not an OT, but the OT who was co-treating with me could guide it. And let me tell you what, once we crawled through and got grounded and we were in a smaller, safer space, watching these kids have this huge shift in their body, it's profound. So I don't know. You're right. There's something to having a clinic perspective and then a home health perspective and being able to marry the two in between, because that's what we need. But I love the coaching piece, because if we're not coaching the caregivers, then we're showing up with a magic wand and taking it away.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. So if you are a new clinician, don't be afraid to put yourself out there and sign up or present or submit proposals to present at different conferences. So last year I got to present at the Arkansas Speech Hearing Association, and I did one just, what is a pediatric feeding evaluation and how can we do that up to Medicaid standards? And this year I've decided that I want to look at that like role of parent coaching on like piece in pediatric feeding disorders and just kind of the importance on that. But I don't know. Whenever I started implementing more parent coaching, that was like another point in my practice. I would say like the big things that kind of pivoted my practice was reading Anxious Eaters, Anxious Mealtime, and
Yes.
understanding like removing pressure. Then that book's by Marcia Duncline. She also has a wonderful master course that I'm taking right now, but I started off with the book because it was cheaper and more cost effective.
Yes.
And so I started that. So like removing pressure and understanding that we have to have like mealtime peace. And so like I interpreted that as like trust and connection going into the meal times. The second big thing that was like a big shift for me was implementing parent coaching and realizing that it doesn't matter if I can, support their child and enjoying foods if they couldn't support them enjoying foods on their own at their home. And I'm at a point in my practice now that I almost think that the parent coaching piece is the most important part of treatment over working with the kids sometimes.
It is.
Which is another thing that I'm loving about being in home health, because the kids have safe places that they can go and play independently. So we send them off, and then me and mom sit at the kitchen table and we chit chat about what the struggles were last week, what the wins were the last week, where we want to go moving forward, and things that we want to start implementing. Because like one, I think that helps create more trust between you and the parent, which you also need working with feeding, because again, you might be asking the parent to change the way that they're nourishing their child. And that's one of our core things that you will do as a parent. You want to, if you think back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, food, water, and shelter, you are, changing that foundational need that parent is, or that caregiver is doing for their child. And so, you can't come in and be a bully about it. I always approach it as, hey, me and you are on the same team. I don't want to come in and tell you, here's what you need to do. I want to make suggestions and us come up with a plan together.
Yes.
So like approaching it more collaboratively versus, well, I'm the expert here, which I don't feel comfortable calling myself the expert most of the time because there's still so much to learn. Same. But yeah, parent coaching is just such an important piece when you're working with PFD.
And there's resources out there that are free that like folks, like I know I talk about the Family Guide to Routines Based, but like FGRBI, it's all of their resources are free. You can get them directly on their website, grow with them. They have tutorials, they have trainings, they have videos. R.A. McWilliams, he's at University of Alabama. He has free resources on this. I mean, there's so many great tools to help that won't break your piggy bank to help expand out their clinical skill set. And yes, they do pull from different areas, but they're well-needed areas. Erin always goes back to the neurobiology of play. That's one of her favorite books. And that's on Amazon. But like, why? And I bought it a year and a half, 2 years ago. I haven't gotten to reading it. I've been reading trashy vampire love novels, not the kind where you glitter to death, because that's stupid. I will stand by that statement. But like real fun, delightful ones that my children should never ever discover. Mommy, read these.
I definitely love a little trashy read every now and then. It keeps things light and easy going.
Yes. I'm now blushing. Change the topic. Dang it, you made me giggle. Thank goodness I peed. Otherwise, that would have been a giggle pee. Okay. All right. So give me some more. If somebody really wants to pursue this, if they want to pursue practicing in PFD and they're newer to the field, or maybe it has been thrust upon them and they've been, doing it for a while, because, and I will say this trepidatiously because I know I'm part of the cause, but for those that we're advocating to put PFD in the public schools, it has a place in the public schools. And we have all of the newest LSHSS journal from earlier this spring had all of the new articles behind PFD and dysphagia and why it needs to be in the public school. And it was based for the public schools. We have the science, we have given the world the how-to guide, but now it's the training. So even if you're a language expert and now you're being asked to do this, what do you recommend?
So I would definitely, I have a buttload of student loans that I'm paying on and getting my life started with my husband. And so I don't just have loads of excess cash laying around that I can take every single amazing CE that I want to take. And a lot of them are really pricey, even though I want to take all of them.
Yeah.
I just keep adding to my to be taken list. And so I am so big in starting off with getting the book, because the book, one, you can go back, you can reference. Two, you can make photocopies for parents if there's a really good paragraph you want them to know about. And three, it gives you the information. It's a starting point. And so for me, like I said, I loved Morrison Klein's Pre-Feeding Skills, A Comprehensive Guide to Mealtime Development. It was my Bible my first couple of years. Marcia Dunn Klein's Anxious Eaters, Anxious Mealtime book was revolutionary in my practice. That was like a huge pivoting moment for me. She also has her masterclass that I'm taking right now, and I would definitely say if you really enjoy that book to go ahead and take the course, because there's so much extra. The book was definitely, I feel, based more or directed more towards parents. Definitely great for clinicians, but the book goes so much more heavy into the research behind everything, which as a nerd, I love that. And so if you're also a fellow nerd, highly recommend the course as well. Another one that was so influential to me was Helping Your Child with Extreme Picky Eating, a step-by-step guide for overcoming selective eating, food aversion, and feeding disorder by Katya Rowell and Jenny McLaughlin. That book was a game changer in how I was able to coach parents, because that one is directed to parents. And so that just gave me a good way to, it gave me a good framework. It gave me good suggestions. I was able to make some nice little handouts from that book to hand out to parents. And then what I loved about that book is they also have the cycle of worry, which put things in perspective for me that I hadn't before. So with the cycle of worry that they talk about, it's my child is not eating for some reason. So I get really stressed and I push more food on them. And then my child resists even more. Then my worry spikes. Then I push food even harder. And so then it's just this cycle. So you have to find a way to break that cycle. So I find I'm like, I feel like this is where we are. Does this resonate with you? And it usually does. And so then we find a way, how can we stop this worry cycle? But I wouldn't have been able to put that in terminology or have that nice graphic without that book. So that was super helpful. And so those are books that I've leaned heavily on. As for cost-effective courses, I obviously work for Speech Therapy PD with my podcast, and I moderate courses for them. But they have been the best platform for quality PFD content. I've taken so many awesome courses from you and Erin. There was a really great assessment of pediatric feeding disorders. It was a 3 or 4.5 hour course. And I'm horrible and don't remember the person that did it, but it was super helpful. And once again, super cost effective, because you pay like a subscription fee, and then you have access to all of the content. And then as for courses that I've paid for, I've taken the Talk Tool Sensory Motor approach, which was like my starting point. And now I'm in the Anxious Eaters, Anxious Mealtimes master class. I've taken, I would say if you're looking for a course, like, yes, like I've took Beckman, and yes, I took Talk Tools. But I would say that if you want to invest in a course, I would find one that really looks more at that like psychosocial piece and takes that into consideration and follows more of a child-led. Because while, yes, working on the feeding skill is so important, I found that a lot of my kids, well, the ones that are selective eaters, so this will be different if you're working with a tube-fed kiddo or something like that. But even if you are working with a tube-fed kiddo that hasn't had a lot of opportunity and might have like very delayed feeding skill, you still need to be so mindful that you're approaching it from a way that they're like motivated to want to eat that food, that they're interested in that food, and still respecting their autonomy for their body. And so I would say if you're looking into courses, that would be some primary things that I would want to, that moving forward, I would want to kind of look into. And then some courses that are on my list that I think I would really like to take. I'm really interested in maybe like the AEIOU feeding course with Nina Johnson.
Christy Brackett. I thought Christy Brackett did AEIOU.
Which is also on my list.
Yeah.
And so those are kind of two that I'm really interested in taking again. And I think that Christy Brackett's Can Eat is on Motivations Learning or something like that. But
Motivations CE. It might have changed the name, but yeah, I got to pitch in the Feeding Matters conference every year.
Oh my gosh, Feeding Matters is so amazing. I went for the first time this year and I can't recommend it enough. It was amazing.
That and what I like is the diversity and thought and diversity in subject matter experts. So you've got specialists from like different fields that are all there. And I enjoy that, but also they have a little research blitz, like the 5-minute research stops.
Yeah.
That I love those.
I the emphasis on parents sharing their stories.
Yes.
Because sometimes it's really easy to overlook what the parents are going through in the name of research or evidence, like the evidence that's there to support what you're doing or like the treatment approach. But listening to the parents tell their stories and share their experiences, like just puts front and center. Like at the end of the day, we're still working with people and we have to like love and honor them as people first before we do anything else. And so it was just like a nice perspective shift for me. Like hearing from parents, because Feeding Matters lifts them up and offers them a seat directly at the table.
Yes. Which doesn't normally happen.
Right.
Yes. I like that one. I try to make, and I say this knowing that I have all of the videos I need to watch, and that's on my to-do list for today on top of everything else. We'll see how it gets done. The American Board of Swallowing and Swallowing Disorders host a summer learning series every summer. And this will be the second, maybe third year I've done it, but it's not much. It's 4 courses for maybe $35. And full disclosure, I do have my BCSS, so potential conflict of interest. But I love that some of the speakers have their BCSS, but not all of them. But it's a good blend between research and clinic, which I like the blend. Yes, give me what new evidence is out there, but like also I need clinical relevance, because it's cool if we know the timeliness of a swallow or a change in this, but like how is that going to change my clinical practice? That's the piece that I need. So I like that one. And then the SIG-13s, when Asha has, and I'm a member there. I don't do anything on the board, I'm not like volunteer. I pay to have access to SIG-13 because they do have really cool stuff that comes out in that SIG. And then shameless plug, I, with advice, helped set up the bloody hell, what do we call it? Dysphagia Pediatric Feeding Disorder Special Interest Group for SHAV, the Speech Hearing Association of Virginia. So we set this up so that, because traditionally, and I hear this across the country, traditionally state associations are school clinician heavy, right? Mm-hmm. It just tends to be. They tend not to have a lot of medical clinicians in there. But At the same time, it's your association that represents all SLPs and audiologists in the state. So we have to advocate for all potential colleagues. And something that when we moved back to Virginia, Ed was like, look, we don't have this. We need this. We need to support our medical-based partners. So we set up this special interest group, and we host bi-monthly. We try to make it monthly, but it doesn't always happen because it's just Ed and I pulling it off. But we host a free CEU to our members every other month. And we've got Dr. Aaron Kleiner coming on later this fall to talk about clinical supervision for pediatric feeding disorder in the NICU in early intervention, which is amazing. It's a free CEU. We had the woman with gel mix Pyrithic talking about infant thickening the last time. We've got one coming up later this fall with Dr. Lindsay Meyer-Turner and Inez Esperanza. Inez, I'm sorry, I mispronounced your last name, on IA barriers for service delivery in PFD. But look to your state associations and call to action. If your state association doesn't have something like this, hint, 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 Maddie, make it, because that's really cool. These are the courses I have crafted, the courses I want to geek out on by inviting all of these people to come speak. So you can, but it's free. Yeah.
That is awesome.
Lindsay Stevens. It was Lindsay Stevens on the thickener. Sorry, neuro brain connected.
And that's another thing too. I recently got involved in ARCSHA. And so if you are a neuroclinician, don't be afraid. So I've been practicing. This is going into my 4th year. Don't be afraid to take that leap and get involved. And granted, I probably wouldn't have done a lot of these things if I didn't have to get more involved for my BCSS. But in pursuing that certification, it's pushed me out of my comfort zone and gotten me more involved. And after listening to Michelle's webinar she did a couple of weeks ago, I immediately sent my committee chair. I was like, hey, here's an idea. Can we get this? Can we start lobbying to get this parent coaching code approved by CMS? Yes. And so if you are involved, you can kind of start bringing those things up, even if you are new. And I've just haven't had anything but positive and kind words from the, older SLPs that are on the board that are, now kind of becoming mentors to me as I'm, exploring this. And so the more you put yourself out there, the more mentors will kind of fall in place and be there to kind of support and help guide you along. So don't be afraid and think you're too new, because you're not.
You're a future, honey. I'm so freaking proud of you. But it's lovely to see that our profession is in good hands. Because sometimes the social media tells you otherwise. But seeing kindness and advocacy through you and your true love for it is utterly wonderful. So thank you for being you.
Oh, thank you, Michelle. Well, thank you for all the amazing resources that you put out, because through all the free content, which the First Bite podcast is also a great place to learn cost effectively about feeding. I know it definitely helped shape the clinician that I am today. So thank you for always advocating for, good resources and putting out educational content, because it's so important, because a lot of this stuff is really pricey. So having cost effective things just makes the world of a difference. So
yeah. That was my steal. My stick. What is the word that you say there? I don't know.
I'm not sure.
I don't know. I was talking to Darlene when we pitched this idea years ago, and I was like, whatever we do, I want to make sure everybody can access it. So it needs to be free. And so that's what I love about all of them, is that they are also free. Because a maven, that's the bird in Malcolm Gladwell's book. I think it's Tipping Point, where there's the one bird that they sometimes get into mischief. But they love knowledge and sharing the knowledge. And Dr. Carol Dudding, who was one of my mentors, who's on the ASHA board of directors, is the vice president of ethics. She's like, you are very much the maven. Also rhymes with raven. And if you've ever seen Teen Titans Go, this is me when I'm murder mad. Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm looking at our time, and to be respectful of everybody's time, if somebody wants to learn more from you, how do they find you? Where do they access you? Tell us all the things.
So you can follow me on Instagram at Madi Metcalf _SLP. And then there you can listen to the Making Sense of Mayo or Making Sense of Selective Eating podcast. They're all under the SLP Learning Series podcasts. But if you search Making Sense of Mayo or Making Sense of Selective Eating on your podcast streaming site, you can listen to those there. And I'm very proud of both of those because I made them the resource that I needed when I was starting out with myofunctional therapy and then working with like selective eaters or pediatric feeding disorders. So yeah.
Yes.
And thank you so much for letting me come on your podcast today, Michelle. I really appreciate it. I don't feel like I am worthy to be the interviewee on this one, but I'm thrilled. And I do think we had some good little nuggets of wisdom to put out there from it. So
It was perfect. You crushed it. Don't fret. This was exactly, but we need to know where to start. And that's everybody needs a good foundation.
absolutely.
Thank you, honey. All right. Well, everybody, check us out on First Bite Podcast on Instagram, on the land of the Facebooks. And mine is hidden, but it's Michelle Dawson SLP. There's probably some underscores in there. It's private for safety. But if you message me, I will normally say yes. But all of those creepy fake AI men robots, I'm like, delete, 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 delete. Yeah. But that's, the AI. It is happening. Yeah, I should never have watched iRobot with Will Smith because, Okay, I had a scary robot joke. Huzzah. Okay. Thanks.
All right.
Thank you for joining us for today's course. To complete the course, you must log into your account and complete the quiz and the survey. If you have indicated that you are part of the ASHA registry and entered both your ASHA number and a complete mailing address in your account profile prior to course completion, we will submit earned CEUs to ASHA. Please allow 1 to 2 months from the completion date for your CEUs to reflect on your ASHA transcript. Please note that if this information is missing, we cannot submit to ASHA on your behalf. Thanks again for joining us. We hope to see you next time.
Feeding Matters guides system-wide changes by uniting caregivers, professionals, and community partners under the Pediatric Feeding Disorder Alliance. So what is this alliance? The Alliance is an open access collaborative community focused on achieving strategic goals within 3 focus areas: education, advocacy, and research. So who is the Alliance? It's you. The Alliance is open to any person passionate about improving care for children with a pediatric feeding disorder. To date, 187 professionals, caregivers, and partners have joined the Alliance. You can join today by visiting the Feeding Matters website at www.feedingmatters.org. Click on PFD Alliance tab and sign up today. Change is possible when we work together. That's a wrap, folks. Once again, thank you for listening to First Bite, fed, fun, and functional. I'm your humble but yet sassy host, Michelle Dawson, the All Things Peds SLP. This podcast is part of a course offered for continuing education through speechtherapypd.com. Please check out the website if you'd like to learn more about CEU opportunities for this episode, as well as the ones that are archived. And as always, remember, feed your mind, feed your soul, be kind, and feed those babies.